Welcome to the Matt Waller Podcast, where we look at success at the intersection of technology, logistics, supply chain, retail, and CPG, also known as the retail value chain. I want to clarify that this podcast is distinct from my responsibilities as a professor in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. Nonetheless, it aligns with my aspiration to provide practical insights to professionals and business by showcasing companies and people that can enhance your ability to manage, lead, and strategize and market effectively in the retail value chain. Before we dive into today's exciting episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, New Road Capital Partners. New Road invests in proven technologies, services, and products that serve unmet needs in the marketplace. They look for companies in supply chain and logistics, as well as consumer-oriented companies. For more information, go to newroadcp.com. I would also like to disclose that I am a strategic advisor to New Road. I'd also like to recognize podcastvideos.com for the services they provide for these podcasts. I'm very pleased with their services. And now, without further ado, let's get into the exciting episode. I have with me today two professors, and we're talking about omni-channel. We're talking about omni-channel from a macroeconomic perspective, from the perspective of supply chain management, merchandising, operations, and even marketing, because all of these are integrated. The professors I have with me today include Travis Tokar, who started his career as a faculty member at Ohio State, and he's been at TCU for over a decade now. And I also have with me today Henry Jean, who is at Miami University of Ohio. Both of these professors have done extensive research on supply chain management and recently, in the past few years, on omni-channel. So today we're going to be talking about omni-channel. I really encourage you, if you're an investor in technology that somehow affects retail or consumer products or omni-channel in general, you should listen to this. If you are maybe a practitioner working for a retailer or a consumer products company or even a carrier, you might want to listen to this as well. You know, we start out talking about phenomena associated with the macroeconomic condition and how that has affected e-commerce and how e-commerce has affected the macroeconomic situation. I think you'll find that quite interesting. We also go into a clear description of what omni-channel actually is, and we even talk about maybe what the competitive advantage, the levers of competitive advantage for omni-channel retailers and suppliers to the omni-channel space are. So I think you'll find this very interesting. Enjoy. Travis and Henry, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about omni-channel.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Thanks. Glad to be here.
I wanted to start out with talking about the popularity of omni-channel. And here is a graph of Google searches from the year 2004 to present, so 20 years. And it shows the relative number of Google searches over the years. So the bottom of the axis is, the vertical axis is 0. The top is 100. And you can see it really took off around 2012 and kind of, it looks like it might be leveling out, but it's hard to know for sure. So I'd like to start out with, first of all, just what do you all think drove this interest in omni-channel?
Well, sure. So speaking of personal experience, for myself at least, omni-channel really became more popular right when broadband became a lot more accessible, and people and also smartphones became a lot more accessible. I think that was also when we were on the verge of transitioning from 3G to 4G. So mobile devices, availability of laptops, just all of these technologies converged. And of course, Amazon also became really popular. And a lot of retailers started to think, how can we defend against this behemoth of a e-commerce retailer? And they thought, you know what, maybe we can leverage our physical locations to fight back. And so then they decided to start offering both brick and mortar and online retail services alongside each other.
Yeah, I think Henry really nails it. I think it's a combination of technological advancements, changes in consumer preferences and expectations, is that people have just gotten more and more used to the convenience of ordering something from a device and having it show up at their house as opposed to getting in a car and going somewhere to get it. It's just grown and grown and grown over the years. Of course, we all know during COVID, the spike that occurred in e-commerce, and then we've just seen a lot of investment from retailers making this something that's just very easy to do. And all of this, I think, has contributed to the growth.
Well, of course, the three of us have done extensive literature reviews on this topic, and of course, we've also talked to a lot of practitioners. But it's clear that competition has also been one of the key drivers of what's going on, and there's so much going on behind the scenes to make it more effective, to make it less costly, more efficient and productive. And, consumers, of course, don't really see that. But there's so much going on behind the scenes. And most of that's driven by competition at this point, it seems like.
Yeah, I should point out, Matt, when I said a second ago that it's become so easy, I was absolutely speaking from a consumer perspective. It's clear from just what we've seen in the literature and what we don't even know the half of as academics as opposed to practitioners, is that there's a whole lot of work that's gone into this over the years in industry to make it so easy for us as consumers to enjoy this.
I was just going to say, thinking back around 2012, I was using an iPhone 4. It was one of the earlier models of iPhone that supported 3G. Because if you guys remember, the very first iPhone did not even support 3G. And so the only time you were able to do anything with the very first iPhone was being connected to Wi-Fi. And of course, with the next, so this was around 2010 was really when people were able to use iPhones with a high-speed access.
Okay, here is a U.S. Census Bureau graph that shows e-commerce retail sales as a percentage of total sales going back, about 10 years or so. And then on the vertical axis, we have the percentage of sales that e-commerce represents. Henry, what do you get from this?
So what you really see is just a picture of steady growth, right? Going back to 2014 and on, you see a clear upward trajectory where the percent of e-commerce retail sales increased from roughly about 6% up to close to 12% until COVID hit, which of course everything shut down, stores were closed, social distancing, and people were afraid of going out. And that is when you see the huge spike in terms of percentage, where we reached a height of almost around 16% of all retail sales were online. Now, what this line does not capture is that a portion of this is online orders made for in-home delivery. And so, so in-home delivery from brick and mortar stores. So whereas the traditional e-commerce that we think of is somebody going on the website or using their app to make a purchase, and then FedEx, UPS, USPS would deliver to home. But that particular spike included the Instacarts, the Shipt, the DoorDash, a home delivery from brick and mortar stores, right? And then you see that precipitous drop. And now it seems like we're back to our long-term trend, and it was sitting right around a hair below 16%.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, if you look at this and you consider a line, it is like it has gone back to the long-term trend. Travis, does that surprise you?
It kind of does, actually. Just that something would revert to an existing trajectory like that, so almost so perfectly. I'm very curious what we're going to see here in the years to come. I mean, I mentioned earlier just how the consumer becomes more and more accustomed to shopping certain ways, and also so much innovation took place during that COVID period. Things like, for example, going to the grocery store and having you purchase on your smartphone and you have it brought out to your vehicle. We're seeing other things. I mean, we hear a lot about drones, and I think those are being implemented in various places. We've yet to see that come into its full capability or use. I just wonder if we're going to continue to see a linear trajectory to this pattern, or if we're going to see another spike, an exponential curve like we did during COVID, just as we hit a tipping point with regard to the technology and innovation that's implemented.
It's a good point. I've even wondered, looking at this, would this have even, I mean, obviously we're back to this long-term trend, but I wonder if that would have happened, or if it would have even decreased the slope a little bit temporarily. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to tell. I mean, if you look at it, it looks like the slope was starting to pick up even before COVID hit. And I know, for example, buy online, pick up at store has, it's been experimented with for years, for several years. But boy, during COVID, it really spiked. And it seemed to me that the retailers were competing to some degree on their ability to ramp up capacity in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Matt, I think one of the underappreciated aspects of what happened during the pandemic was that it was really a forced environment for retailers to basically adapt or die, right? You need the revenue, you need the cash flow, so you better figure out ways to sell to consumers. And it's this forced evolution that basically forced retailers to experiment with different ways of omni-channel retailing, or else online retailers were going to eat their lunch because, right around that time, you were seeing the rise of these like grocery or meal kit subscription services. And for a while, retailers had no idea, how do we fight back? And when the pandemic hit, people no longer shop in stores. They really had to figure out, how can we continue to serve the customers who otherwise would have come into the store? And as they figured out how to serve the customers, I think the fact that we reverted back to a long-term trend kind of shows that a lot of brick and mortar retailers did figure it out, and they're figuring it out in such a way that it is kind of balancing the need for e-commerce along with be able to entice consumers to keep coming into the store to, if not reverse the trend altogether, at least go back to the long-term trend from before.
One other thing that changed, of course, during COVID, a lot of restaurants started providing outdoor seating, and cities changed rules to allow for that as well. I prefer to eat outside, regardless of the temperature, and so I'm grateful for that change. There clearly were a lot of, innovations in how services and retail in particular were delivered through COVID. So this next chart again covers about the same time frame, but you'll see here that The blue line represents the producer price index by industry, and this is new warehouse building construction. That's the left-hand column. It's an index. And then the right, the vertical axis on the right side is e-commerce retail sales as a percentage of total, which is what we were just looking at. So the red line is now blue. It's the same thing we just talked about. And what's been added in here is the producer price index for new warehouse building construction. So, Henry, would you mind speaking to this a little bit?
Yeah. And so what's the most fascinating thing with this graph is earlier in the previous slide, we kind of discussed how brick and mortar retailers are fighting back. What we see with the new warehouse construction is how online retailers are fighting back against the brick and mortar retailers, because online retailers, they may not necessarily have the physical facilities, the physical storefronts. And so as omni-channel retailing continued to take off, as consumer habits started to change, they expect much more rapid fulfillment speed. And so we basically went on this building boom for warehouse space. And I remember during that time frame, I was talking to some 3PLs, some warehousing companies, and they said that warehousing lease costs were through the roof. And any warehouse space close to the city is just not going to be able to justify most of their shipment needs. And so you have all these new warehouses being built, in part because online retailers or warehouse service providers, they're trying to be located closer to the customers so that customers don't revert to the previous habit of brick and mortar shopping and try to get a piece of that omni-channel retailing pie.
Yeah, I'd say the Amazon effect is probably a big piece of this. To Henry's point, the standard in terms of what the consumer expects for delivery lead times has been going down and down. Well, the standard has been increasing in the mind of the consumer. The lead time has been decreasing in terms of what the consumer expects or demands. And so to be able to keep up, we've gone from where, years ago, a 4 or 5 day delivery time was really fast to, then it was 2 day, then it's 1 day, and now it's same day. I mean, I just the other night was on my, forget what it was I needed, but it was pretty late in the evening. With the click of a button, it was at my doorstep at 4 a.m. I mean, within hours. And I know I'd live in a major metro or pretty close to one, so I know it's not quite that extreme in all parts of the country, but it's getting there. And I think this graph kind of speaks to that. To achieve that, they've had to put facilities in a lot of different places. And so, yeah, I think the competition is driving this tremendously.
If you look how steep that blue line is starting just before 2022, it is absolutely unheard of how steep that is. And then it clearly levels off. I don't know to what degree that leveling off is a factor, is affected by the interest rates, right? And maybe even just capacity for building. I don't know.
Yeah, just economic conditions in general. If people aren't buying as much, then, well, of course, the existing capacity is sufficient. But so that might be a piece of it as well. I guess time will tell.
Well, with inflation, that's a good point, Travis, because with inflation, consumers are spending less on general merchandise. They're still spending on, groceries because they have to. But they're spending less on general merchandise, and a lot of these e-tailers are selling general merchandise. So I wonder, it could be both of those factoring into it.
Yeah. Well, I remember towards the end of the year, there were more and more articles were coming out saying that consumers are they're basically run out of the pandemic savings, and coupled with the increased interest rate, it becomes pricier to service debt. And I think a lot of it has to do, to your point, guys, is the rising interest rate, consumers tapping out, and depending on who you ask, we've been also in a freight recession, and so lower inventory, lower freight needs translate into less warehouse needs. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I saw an article, it must have been a week or two ago now, about all the empty warehouse space in China. So I think there was a boom there, much like we're seeing in this graph here in terms of facilities that were built and handle demand for consumer goods, and talking a lot about these places are vacant at the moment. And, what does that mean for those who invested or built these? And so it'll be interesting to see, what we observe here the years to come.
I also wonder about the location. There's this migration. If you look at when all this was being done, the migration was starting to occur. And I don't know how significant it is in terms of numbers, but from what I've seen, I think it's pretty significant. Like people moving from, New York and Chicago and California to places like Texas and Florida. Florida in particular, I've seen some graphs of, it's just mind-boggling how many people are moving to Florida.
Oh yeah, it's if you look at the price of shipping stuff out of California. The cost of shipping stuff out of California is more than 4 times the price of shipping into California, because companies were trying to get their equipment back to California. So they were willing to even take a loss just to get their equipment back. So and they'll just make the money back on the outbound freight. But of course, with California and their with the new emission standard or their new initiative for electric trucks, who knows?
Well, that's true. Because California has some rule now that says that any incremental capacity, transportation capacity, trucks going into ports or intermodal facilities have to be alternative energy sources that would primarily be electric, and at the same time, their electric grid is way under capacity. I wonder how that's going to affect things.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to the next slide. Here you see, again, the red line is what we talked about on the first slide. The blue line is what we just talked about. And now the green line is the inbound price index for intermodal services, specifically air freight. So, Henry, what do you make of this?
So the most obvious thing is if you look at the spike and the fall in air freight, the fall in air freight really coincided with the meteoric rise of Temu, right? Which, of course, if you are familiar with what Temu does, and Travis, to your point earlier about all the empty warehouses in China, there are so many empty warehouses in China that a company like Temu can basically get them warehouse space on the cheap. And now, if you see the falling air freight price, that they're able to take advantage of cheap air shipping. And so cheap warehouse space plus cheap air freight shipping plus cheap supplier translates into one of the best disinflationary forces that is Temu. That they're able to offer basically something you would find on Amazon for like $12. Temu can sell it for like $2 and still make money on it. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I have not been keeping up with air freight, so this is actually pretty interesting to me to see it. And what Henry just kind of laid out in terms of the story makes a lot of sense. I actually asked my students in class last semester. Again, I'm a little slow on some of these retailers. I guess it was about fall last year. I'd heard of Shen and Temu for the first time in some articles, and asked my students about it. And they're like, "Oh yeah, this is awesome." So to Henry's point, things that you may have paid X for on Amazon, you're now paying some fraction of that. if you're willing to wait a little bit longer. Now, the air freight, I'm sure, helps keep those lead times competitive. I was told that the lead times could be, between a week to 2 weeks or more in some cases. And so if air freight's cheap, I'm sure that really does help their business model. To me, it raises interesting questions, and I'm not trying to go off on tangents here, but, my own interest is always in the individual consumer decision-making and how people think. And so it just raises interesting questions in my mind about how people truly do value lead time when it comes to purchase decisions. We all talk about, we mentioned earlier, the Amazon effect and the push towards faster and faster and faster. But what the success of Temu has shown is that people could be okay with slower lead times under certain circumstances. And so understanding of that, I think, is really important for retailers. And as a researcher, I think it's fascinating.
Although if you think about the Temu slogan, shop like a billionaire, right? Does it imply that billionaires are willing to wait? I don't think I know of any billionaire that's willing to wait.
Yeah. So
that's a good point, Travis. I'm glad you brought in the consumer decision making into this, and I just think that this is an unusual situation, and I wonder what would happen. So, Temu, you're right, Henry. What a great point. It's like a lot of macro factors helped facilitate that. And then there's the issue about consumer behavior that Travis brought up, how consumers are willing to wait, how long they're willing to wait. Maybe, Travis, too, I wonder, given that consumers now have smaller budgets to work with because of inflation and because of the interest rates, I wonder if they're willing to wait more because of that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a fair question. For a discount, the evidence that Temu provides us suggests that, yeah, absolutely. The question is, how deep does that discount need to be? Does it only pertain to certain types of products or certain purchase circumstances? Right. So, for example, if I'm shopping for some random gadget or gizmo that maybe just for fun or out of interest, no big deal if it takes a week to get to me. I didn't really need it that bad anyway. But for other types of products or a gift or, maybe something related to health as opposed to just consumption, maybe consumers have a different set of preferences, or they'll tolerate, and maybe they won't be so accepting of these longer lead times, even at a discount. So I think there's some interesting questions. There's probably retailers out there that already know the answer to this, right? They're always doing interesting things, and they have all the data in the world to work with. And in academia, we're always at the mercy of what we can get our hands on. But these are some questions that I have a lot of interest in right now.
Now, Travis, I like that you mentioned that how retailers have access to data, because if you look at what Amazon has been doing over the last few years, when you check out, they oftentimes allow you to choose a slower shipping option. Right?
Yeah.
And in exchange, they would previously give you digital product credits, and lately they've been giving you like additional percentage cashback if you're using Amazon credit card. I suspect that Amazon already has some idea in terms of what is the demand elasticity, or to what extent are people willing to wait in exchange for some kind of financial incentive. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you guys saw that Amazon actually made the announcement to a bunch of Chinese suppliers to say that, hey, we're basically going to open up the discount storefront just like Temu, where you guys can sell directly and ship directly. So, Amazon's following Temu's footsteps by basically doing the same thing, because there is a market for it, apparently.
Yeah, I saw that as well, and just goes to show that Amazon's taking this seriously. So while you were pointing out a minute ago, Henry, that there's some macro level factors that have really contributed to the rise, that if those factors weren't in place, may not allow Temu to do what they do. It looks like Amazon must be forecasting that they'll be able to continue to do what they're doing, at least for a little while because they're investing in ways to compete. So I found that interesting.
This is so amazing. When you think about, again, competition's driving all this. Mm-hmm. And the main beneficiaries are clearly the consumers, I mean, people are making a lot of money in the process, but consumers are benefiting from all of this competition.
Absolutely.
And I noticed, Travis, I'd like to ask you, since we're talking about this, if you are ordering something at certain online retailers, sometimes they'll say, look, if you wait a couple of you can basically, if I'm ordering 3 things and I wait and I order them on the same delivery date, it'll say that it'll have less packaging and so forth. I don't know how much people do that, but I've done it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Henry mentioned a little bit ago that they'll offer discounts. In the past, Amazon's offered like a free digital download if you'll bundle your purchases to one particular day of the week for delivery. And sometimes I've done it too. Usually out of a guilty conscience in some form, I guess you could call it. Other times, I just want what I want and I want it right now. I had a chance to work on a project actually very recently with Rod Thomas, who's there at the University of Arkansas. And Rod had a really interesting idea. He's published on this topic, I think, in some other areas. But what he was interested in and we started talking about was using incentives of various forms to get people to not necessarily accept a longer lead time. I think he'd looked at that in some previous work. But what we were interested in recently was actually changing or shifting their channel preference. So there's been a lot of work that have pointed out how retailers really need people coming into the store for various reasons. It just makes things so much more efficient, fewer returns, more opportunity for add-on purchases and things, if you can get them to actually visit the store. So if we can't avoid people shopping online, can we at least get them to come pick up at the store as opposed to home delivery? So Rod and I looked at offering some various forms of incentives, a minor discount to pick up in store as opposed to have home delivery, or simply present some information, just a note or a little message at checkout saying, hey, if you'll pick up in store, this reduces carbon emissions or, has various impacts along those lines. And what we found is that the discounts really didn't do much of anything, but that people responded pretty favorably to just the simple messaging. And so, a second ago, I mentioned in the past when I've selected the, bundling of purchases for Amazon, it's almost always because, I guess this makes fewer packages and one van trip as opposed to 3 or 4. So I can live with that. I've never once shifted any of my Amazon purchases, for example, for $1 discount or for a digital download. It's just not going to move the needle for me. Henry, I don't know, have you had similar shopping experiences?
I'm the opposite, Travis.
Really? Okay.
I respond 100% to digital credits because for a simple reason. When my kids really, really want to watch something, and we're getting to the point where even if we own something on DVD, like one of those Leapfrog, edutainment videos, we're getting too lazy to pop the DVD. And so we just like to accumulate those digital credits just to buy them to have digital access.
This makes so much sense now. I've always wondered who wants a digital download, but I'm just at a different stage in life. Yeah, and my girls, we've got, of course, Apple Music or whatever. They can just get whatever they want now. Their Blue's Clues is long past their viewership, so that makes a whole lot of sense. I'm learning all kinds of things today. So I always thought Amazon was crazy for this, but clearly not.
I wouldn't be surprised if we're the biggest reason for Amazon to not get rid of that option.
That's funny.
No, but on a more serious point, Travis, if you think about Amazon and all the digital services they offer, right? I mean, they're charging on top of the basic Amazon Prime music. They're now charging for Amazon Music Unlimited. and they're charged on top of your basic Prime. They're charging for extras like HBO Max channel or additional channels. All of those people can use digital credits to pay for. And so you have a certain percent of population who are subscribed to Amazon Music Unlimited instead of Apple Music, and instead of paying for subscription, they just accumulate these digital credits to pay for their subscriptions.
Yeah. It just shows how isolated I am as a consumer in some respects then. So that's, very interesting.
Okay, so moving on to this next slide. Once again, you can see the green line is the air freight, and the purple line is the delivery and warehouse industries. It's producer price index by industry, but this is focused on delivery and warehouse. And so this data set goes all the way back before the Great Recession. So the gray line, the gray area there is the Great Recession. And then COVID, the onslaught of COVID there is the second gray line. And basically, you see that air freight goes way up and then drops back down. And then the delivery and warehouse industries is, it looks like it's a new trend line that has a steeper slope. Henry, would you speak to this one?
Yeah. So the story with this graph is really simple. In fact, Matt, I'm glad you picked up on the recession areas, and I included the Great Recession on purpose. And that is because what I want to illustrate is, if you look at delivery and warehouse industries, this really looks almost like a smooth line of the omni-channel search term that we saw in the beginning, right?
Well, that's a good point.
And
Google searches.
This trend seems to be, hardly affected by one of the greatest recessions, the greatest recession that we've experienced in recent years. So it goes to show that omni-channel retailing, at least in my view, it's strictly driven by habit. As people form habits, they don't change their habits. Even if there's a recession, they still want omni-channel retailing, and it is going to be an enduring trend. And Matt, to your point, it only picked up since the pandemic, and that with delivery and warehouse industries, people want more products closer to them to be delivered to their homes, and the purple line captures all of it, and it's juxtaposed with the air delivery, which is more for those speed sensitive, I want it now type of products. And you can see it's a lot more sensitive to recessions and general economic trends.
Travis, from a consumer decision-making perspective, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think Henry really nailed it with it just shows the robustness of this phenomenon overall. It's just keeps on ticking, and regardless of the economic conditions at any given point in time, there's just growth.
Okay, so this purple line, it seemed very steady. If you used regression, it would have a very high R square before 2020. And then if you were to, it looks like there's a new regression line after 2020 that has a lot higher slope. But again, I would think that would have a very high R square as well. But what would you think, what was it about the pandemic that caused the steepness of that slope for delivery and warehouse industries to increase, especially considering the other graphs we saw about e-commerce? You see what I mean?
So I'm going to jump in here real quick. I think it reflects two things. One is the pandemic savings, like people saved a lot of money. They're buying more stuff. But then secondly, is inflation. That as people have more money to spend, demand for home delivery, a warehouse space also increases. And as a result, you just have all of those cost factors getting priced in to what we see here in the trend.
Yeah, that makes sense. Going on to the next slide here, this goes the horizontal axis goes from 2019 to 2028, and obviously 25, 26, 27, 28 are forecast, but this is parcel volumes, and it basically shows that U.S. actual parcel volumes versus pre-pandemic forecast in billions. And so the orange line with the light blue dots is the forecast. The blue line is the actual, and the gray line is the forecast past 2023. Henry, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, so this is really kind of illustration of what we just talked about. That with the PPI, a lot of folks are going to think that it's inflation. But if you look at this, is the Pitney Bowes forecast of shipment volume from 2019, that there was an above average, rather above expected growth in parcel shipping, and that reflects increased ship to home shopping amount. Now, what this graph does not capture, though, is to what extent these are online orders shipped from warehouses, from pure play online retailers, or to what portion of it is shipped to home by omni-channel physical retailers. But what collectively this graph tells you is that there was a pandemic-driven ship-to-home habit that was above the long-term trend line. And then we're reversing back into our previous trend. And I believe it's in part because that consumers have realized that there's still value in going to physical stores to make purchases. And I can certainly say that during the pandemic, I had my pandemic 10 pounds, and without going into a physical retailer to try on the clothes, I just end up basically doubling the parcel shipment every time I make something or make a purchase.
Well, this also doesn't show how much of this is returns.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It includes returns. So, so maybe you had a bunch of folks that bought clothes based on their pre-pandemic sizes and end up returning them.
Travis, returns is a big problem with omni-channel and e-commerce in general. Do you think that's improving at all, or what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. There's been some really interesting articles published, both academic and just in business press, about how costly they are, what retailers do with all this merchandise that's sent back. And I feel like there's some progress being made overall, but, the retailers, well, they've gotten the consumer interested in e-commerce through the promise of easy returns over time. And so how do you take that back, right? How do you walk back this feature that you use to get people to actually engage? And so there's been some interesting papers. There's some folks at University of Tennessee and Texas A&M that have done some really interesting research on this, and been kind of getting into it myself a little bit in various ways. And there's when you look at return policies that retailers have put into place over time, there's been various changes as I think they've been trying to figure out how do we dial this back without angering the consumer. And cracking down on things like the amount of time people have to make a return, or whether or not there's a fee associated with the return. I think as long as the consumer, there's some evidence anyway, that as long as the consumer feels that they're getting a fair deal out of it or being treated fairly in the process, that they can live with some stricter terms. So, for example, when it comes to like a return fee, I know returns are very expensive for retailers to process, and they'd love to be able to recoup some of that if they can. Now, if you just implement a blanket return fee, no one likes that. In fact, the work that I've done, and Matt, you've been involved in some of these projects, shows that return fee is just universally despised. However, if you can, as a retailer, present some justification for this. So, for example, if you return to the store an online purchase free of charge, if you'd like to ship it back to one of our facilities, then yeah, we're going to have to implement a fee to handle the processing. Again, nobody really likes that, but it makes it more palatable to the consumer. Or, for example, limiting things with regard to store credit, right? Everybody wants cash back for a return. If you've made a sale as a retailer, you'd like to hold on to that, and issuing store credit kind of keeps the consumer captive, but it's not a popular thing. If, however, you can put some policy in place that says, okay, if you have a receipt, no problem, of course, cash back. But if you don't have a receipt for this item, well, then we're going to give you store credit instead. That tends to go over much better with consumers. So, there's some work that's being done, like I said, that's, I think, shining some light on how retailers can get away with dialing things back, but I think it'll continue to be a problem. To Henry's point a few minutes ago, when it comes to apparel, people just have to touch and feel and try on and see how a garment fits. And, outside of some, major leaps in AI technology, which could happen, but, I think people are always going to want to try something on physically in person before they decide on a purchase. How do you deal with that as an apparel retailer? So returns are going to be a major part of their business, I think, for years to come. And so just being smart with it and finding ways to do things that aren't going to anger the consumer is probably key.
And Travis, since the topic is on omni-channel retailing, a lot of manufacturers are doing direct-to-consumers, DTC channel, right? So you're talking about apparel manufacturers like Nike, Lululemon, and there was a recent industry white paper that came out that said basically, whatever is the theoretical savings that, or rather margin expansion that apparel manufacturers could have enjoyed by adopting a direct-to-consumer format, they actually don't have any higher margins than their wholesale business. Because I think that's what you're talking about, that they're having so many customer returns, or the only way they can even entice people to come in or to make a DTC channel purchase is through online advertisements with massive discounts. And whatever those tactics are to provide customer service ends up eating away at all the margins that they could have gained by, selling at a higher price point as compared to the lower price point at wholesale.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'd like to see those articles, Henry, but that makes sense given what I've been reading. It's a very expensive problem for retailers.
Travis, I'm curious, how heterogeneous or homogeneous are the retailer return policies, especially from an e-commerce perspective?
Yeah, if you look at CPGs, for example, that's basically what I know best. There's a lot of consistency, and I think that speaks to the nature of the competition in the industry. Nobody wants to be way stricter than the next store that someone could shop with. So I think that's driven some homogeneity. And I think perhaps also, too, that retailers, maybe through trial and error, have dialed in on what consumers are okay with and where they start to kind of balk a little bit. But I'd say overall, Matt, it's fairly consistent, actually. And again, as I'm speaking of consumer product retailers.
On that topic, it just reminds me of something I saw on TikTok that people are abusing return policies, right? So it almost like, as a retailer, you don't necessarily want to be known as the one with the most lax return policy, or you're going to be subject to abuse. Like, for instance, I know for a long time, people were saying like Amazon has a really, really generous online return policy. I mean, that's absolutely true. But it got to the point where, I'm kind of cheap by nature. So I would buy those Amazon warehouse deals. But sometimes when I buy those Amazon warehouse deals, let's say I buy a pre-owned, what Amazon described as quote unquote like new vacuum cleaner, right? And by the time I get it, what I discover is, people swapped out the new filter with an old filter because they didn't want to pay for a filter. And so it looks new on the outside, but I end up having to buy a new filter anyway, right? So you have all these return frauds. And during the pandemic, I remember also reading about these Walmart returns of, people were lucky enough to buy a PlayStation 5. And then they returned it to Walmart and it wasn't checked properly. So the next person to buy it directly from the store finds out that it's just cement blocks inside the box and not a PlayStation 5.
Yeah. I've heard, the opportunity for fraud and the cost associated with it is astronomical in some situations, which is why there's been such a crackdown, I think, on some of the historically lenient return policies. You see things, for example, it's pretty common. Matt, you asked about some of the commonality. If you don't have a receipt, there's the IT systems are good enough that, especially if you pay with a credit card, the retailer can probably look it up and see, when the purchase was made, how much it was, and all that. But if that's not possible, they still may choose to give you a refund. A lot of the policies state it's at the discretion of the manager, and they require that you have some identification, like a driver's license, so that they can keep record of how often you're coming back and returning things, particularly kind of under maybe suspicious circumstances, no receipt, no record. And I'm assuming it's so that those handful of individuals that are really abusing this, they can keep tabs on it and say, no, sorry, cut you off. But they can continue to be as lenient as possible with the average person who, maybe just lost a receipt or whatever. So,
well, Travis, this reminds me of a funny story. Back when I was still at Walgreens, I remember distinctly this one day I had this one person that came in trying to return a bottle of Equate branded product, which of course Equate is a Walmart brand, right?
Yeah, so, different W retailer.
Yeah. So the customer tried to return it. I said, "When did you buy this?" And the customer said something like last year, but they no longer need it. And so I said, "But this is Equate. It's a Walmart brand." And the customer goes, "Well, that's a wall. You're a wall. What's the difference?" and this was before omni-channel retailing ever took off. So returns fraud has always been there, except. Whereas before you used to get these funny stories, and now it's becoming more and more difficult to catch.
Well, we've been talking about omni-channel in a very broad sense, and talking about all kinds of macroeconomic factors that are driving things, shocks to the system that are driving things, new competitors. But we really haven't defined omni-channel yet. So I think maybe what we can do next is talk about this slide, Henry, that you created that differentiates between multi-channel retailing, cross-channel retailing, and omni-channel retailing. Would you mind explaining this?
Yeah, sure. So this 3-column view, it really depicts kind of like the evolution of omnichannel retailing. Way back in the day when it first got founded, it was more or less like a brick and mortar retailer trying to fight back, right? Trying to fight back to say, hey, we want our customers to be able to buy stuff online and be able to buy stuff in stores, which of course back then you end up with this kind of odd marriage of Target letting Amazon managing their entire online channel. And I think Toys R Us allowed Amazon to manage their entire online channel as well. But then as over time, they saw that they were not reaping much financial benefit from it at all. In fact, if anything, added extra cost because they ended up having to have two different channels, individually managed by different groups, different teams. And on top of that, Travis, kind of to your point earlier, that you end up having all of these return requests when their systems can't even talk to each other, right? So, for instance, if a Target shopper bought something off of Amazon from the Target store, way back when, they could not have returned it in stores. So that was literally multi-channel retailing was just multiple channels operating in parallel in completely separate, almost like universe, right? And then they started to figure out how do we provide more consumer convenience. And so then they started to try to integrate systems across channels, but mostly to the consumer end, so that online and on-shelf inventories can be used to fulfill both e-commerce and in-store orders. But the problem with that is they still have to keep two separate pools of inventory. And let's say that an in-store shopper comes to the store only to see that on-shelf inventory is completely gone. And then you need to get someone in-store to bring the online inventory to fill an in-store transaction. And so they ended up adding a whole lot more logistical complexity and logistic costs. But at least from the consumer's perspective, things are becoming a little bit more seamless. And so having taken care of the consumer side, that's when retailers really got to work to try to figure out how do we optimize our backend process? How do we get more savings to make this cross-channel retailing financially beneficial, if not sustainable? And so they started to integrate on-shelf and online inventory, and eventually they started to have just one person oversee both channels to make decisions, all for the purpose of providing consumers with a seamless shopping experience.
I think that's a good explanation. And it would be interesting to know, and if anyone listening to this knows, please tell us about it. But I'd be curious to know, so the phenomena you mentioned, one particular one that is interesting is most retailers started with that were both brick and mortar and e-commerce. They started with a merchant that focused on e-commerce and then a merchant that focused on the stores. And now they've integrated those, as you're saying, in the omni-channel space. It would be interesting to know how many retailers have actually made that move and when they made it. Maybe it's out there, maybe it's not, I don't know. But even after they make that move from an organizational structure perspective, there's still other challenges. Technology is a challenge, right? Business process is a challenge because there were existing business processes for both, and then people training challenges, right? If you started off as a merchant in e-commerce, you probably are going to behave differently than if you started off in e-commerce as a brick and mortar merchant.
Yeah, you know what, Matt? That's a great point. I think it extends beyond that, because let's say that I'm an omni-channel merchant or I'm an omni-channel buyer. And, back before, we don't know if the supplier has just one single key account manager overseeing two different people, or are there two different key account managers, one overseeing the e-commerce channel, the other seeing the brick and mortar channel? For me, if I'm the omnichannel merchant buyer, dealing with two different key account managers would be kind of a pain.
That's interesting. So I'd love to see data on this, but based on my experience and my knowledge of this, it seems to me like retailers might be ahead of the suppliers to retail in this regard. I think they've been slower to adjust. And of course, even within retail, if you think about it, there's some retailers that may have a merchant that's really focused on what would be considered a very narrow part of a category, both online and in the store. But if you don't have the volume, you have to have a bigger piece of that. But you're right. From a key account manager perspective, you would think if you're dealing with a omni-channel merchant, going to them with data that tells the picture, right? Because the merchant, in some ways, is like a business owner in a way. They're managing these collection of products, and so if the key account manager's coming with an incomplete picture, or maybe there's two people that are coming, but they haven't really communicated clearly with one another or thought through it from an integrated perspective, that could slow down the retailer. I'm going to go to one last slide here, and this slide looks at omni-channel retailing. This is the far right. If you look at the far left here, that where it says omni-channel retailing, that comes from the previous slide on the far right side. And then Henry's got this blown up into two different pieces here, the omni-network media and the omni-segment retailing. Could you explain that, Henry?
Yeah. So really, this omni-network media concept comes from the retail media network. And if you guys go into stores these days, for instance, all of those are cooler doors. I mean, you already have glass there, and the technology for a semi-transparent TV is already there. So why not convert those into advertisement, right? And when you go out, when you're shopping, when you're checking out, do self-checkout, you're in front of the screen, right? Why not start showing ads in there? But at the same time, you also have a lot of folks who prefer the legacy advertisement forms, like the printed circulars, that the coupons, and also increasingly with parcel deliveries, that you have advertisements printed on the tape that you use, right? And so what it really shows is that because omnichannel retailing is really about interacting with consumers at any way, shape, or form possible during the a transaction process, that you have so many opportunities to present messages to the consumer. So, Travis, to your point earlier, how effective would it be to incorporate these advertisements to compel consumers to make the sustainable choice, right? But in that case, it's not necessarily financial benefit, but it would still uphold a company's triple bottom line. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's the media aspect. The second portion, it represents the omni-segment retailing, and that is a more advanced, nuanced perspective on how to better serve your customers. So, for instance, back in 2013, one of the most widely cited omnichannel retailing publications talked about how retailers are able to augment their in-store inventory with endless aisles of virtual product assortment, right? But having endless aisles of product assortment options, it's very much of a push format. But in supply chain management, what we've learned that works the best is more of a pull format that allows you to minimize waste, be lean, to be more sustainable. And so the next step in this omnichannel evolution is the idea of omni-segment retailing, that understanding immediately who your consumer, who an individual, one consumer is, to be able to micro segment down to that level and be able to offer different products based on customized product selection based on these 6 dimensions. And the reason why, so the price, speed, they're both very obvious. But if you look at authenticity, there are services popping up like the RealReal, and actually Amazon now offers a similar authenticated services because they recognize that along with this e-commerce, you also have rising concerns with counterfeit products. I've purchased counterfeit products myself unwittingly, and I was pretty angry. And then you have these brand-related. I'm not sure, Matt and Travis, if you guys shopped on Amazon recently, but you have all of these brands that you can't even pronounce. It seems literally like my son picked up some letter blocks and threw it up in the air to call it whatever that brand, right? And so, you have some customers who are very brand conscious. How do you make sure that you don't, for lack of a better term, junkify your product assortment presentation, right? And then there are the country of origin, there's the transparency aspect, and country of origin is becoming even more important. Is precisely because, as we talked about earlier, with air freight becoming cheaper, and you have these cross-border e-commerce warehouses set up outside our country's border, and you can bet the carbon footprint on these air freight, like the Temu model, it's huge. So, how do you help consumers making the sustainable choice? And for some consumers, certain countries are associated with higher likelihood of counterfeit. And lastly is the idea of transparency. Like, but when it comes to e-commerce, you have all of these back-end processes that consumers don't necessarily see. So how do you communicate to consumers? How do you let them know that you're working on their order, that you're being responsible with their order? Some consumers care more than others. And so being able to have this omni-segmenting to be able to instantly define a consumer at the individual level, what their profile looks like, to be able to present almost this customized storefront, in my view, is the next step in this omnichannel evolution.
Henry, there are a ton of things that you just laid out that I personally find fascinating, and I think we could spend multiple podcasts digging into. One of the things that resonated in one of the projects that we've worked on together recently, actually doing some lit review and looking at specifically what are some of the capabilities that have been identified in academic literature as essential for executing omnichannel. And I think all of us intuitively knew that there'd be a lot about logistics and operations and those types of things. But getting to some of the things that you pointed out just a second ago, I was really struck by some of the research, and most of it's in the last 4 or 5 years, that points to the importance of information sharing, trust, to be able to get the insight that's required to create these customized experiences for consumers, and not just to try to sell us more stuff necessarily, although I'm sure every retailer is happy to do that. A lot of it is so that they can operate as efficiently as possible, like you're saying, so they can keep costs down, they can compete, they can continue to offer new innovation. And so it was a surprise to me to see that it's not just about where we put warehouses and how do we structure our networks and things. There is a whole lot in there about how do we get our hands, first of all, on good information and use it to make efficient decisions.
Yeah, and I know both of you have more kids than me. I can only handle 2 myself, so props to you guys for having more than that. But with my kids, if I buy something online, and they're going to be bugging me saying, "Daddy, when am I getting this? When am I getting this?" I would appreciate to be able to log on to my account and be able to tell my kids, "All right, guys, it is coming on this day. just so that my kids can stop bugging me until that day.
Show them the map. Hey, it's here.
Well, pinky right now, it'll be a thumb in 2 days.
There you go. So,
well, this shows, I think, that one other phenomena associated with omni-channel, this slide really points to the fact that there has to be a lot more integration of supply chain management, operations, merchandising, and marketing, maybe than there's ever been, right? Yeah. And I wonder to what degree mastering that can create a competitive advantage.
Well, Matt, I think immediately of what our good friends at Ohio State have been preaching for years is that supply chain management is everybody's job. You cannot effectively deliver products and services without the involvement of every functional area. And so to your point, I think to compete, that's going to be more important than it's ever been before.
Because it's interesting, I think, so let's take retailers. Retailers are spending a lot of effort to try to do really specific operational things, right? Like maybe having an integrated inventory management solution, which we all agree is very important, or maybe trying to maximize revenue from retail media networks, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these things, better, in-store experience when there's pickers in the store, which now a lot of retailers are trying to build fulfillment centers in the backs of their stores, and also returns policies, et cetera, et cetera. But maybe the competitive advantage really comes in bringing all of this together. Mm-hmm. And no one really has experience with that. And I wonder, if you look at some retailers like maybe Amazon as an example, they're omni-channel to some degree, but they really don't have the true brick and mortar footprint. It is true they've got Whole Foods, but that's not the same, is it? Henry, what do you think about that?
No, what you just mentioned actually kind of reminds me of Walgreens, because unlike Amazon, Walgreens is literally everywhere, right? But unfortunately, a lot of Walgreens, I think some 2,000 stores, are not doing very well, and they're on the verge of being closed. And so what I'm wondering is, as far as Amazon is concerned, is there room for Amazon to expand their footprint by partnering up with a neighborhood store? It doesn't have to be Walgreens, but someone with a footprint to really expand their omni-channel network. They have Amazon Locker already, and they're experimenting with Amazon Fresh. But Walgreens had I think a failed joint effort with Kroger in bringing Kroger Express into their stores. So, is there room for this kind of co-opetition setup between a predominantly physical retailer with a predominantly online retailer to try to bring each other's competencies together to successfully compete?
Well, for those of you listening, and I know most of the listeners to this podcast are actually practitioners or investors, not so much academics. You've heard this from a very academic perspective, but the research that is going on, and there's a lot of research going on omni-channel, not just from the three of us, but from hundreds of faculty members around the world, is making progress. There's some really neat findings out there that we haven't had time to go into. But we, the three of us, are interested in continuing our research, and we need industry partners for this. As Travis mentioned earlier, academics can only get so much from archival data and experiments with human subjects. A lot of times we need to engage with industry. Travis, do you have anything more to add to that or any specifics?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. It's certainly the ability to get data is one thing, but I would say what I'm very interested in hopefully getting some feedback from your audience about is just what questions should we be asking, right? As academics, we see the world through certain sets of lenses, and we examine problems in certain ways. And while I believe we add value in certain areas, many times we just don't have the insight to be asking the precise right questions at the right time that could truly be as impactful as as if we had that insight. So I would love to hear from your audience more about what are they interested in knowing? What types of problems are they trying to solve? And what types of things keep them up at night right now? Where do they see things going in the days to come? I mean, I think all of the three of us all have ideas of what comes next or what may happen next. But what are the folks that are truly immersed in this every day thinking and predicting?
Yeah, I think the nature of supply chain management, what we do, it is so industry focused already that there's a very natural partnership between researchers like us and the industry members. In fact, all of us have our background in industry, and a lot of our research questions are motivated by industry. And hopefully we can get some industry members who are interested in kind of finding out some of the questions that we have, as well as may have questions that we can help to answer.
Matt, if I may, I'll give one quick example, and I'll keep it to 2 minutes or less for the sake of time. But several years ago, I had some friends that were running a small business, an apparel boutique, and they came to me and said, "Well, you teach supply chain management and logistics and stuff, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why you could put me on the spot like this?" And so we have a question. We are delivering a lot of e-commerce orders. In fact, that was a huge part of their business, and shipping all of it through the Postal Service, which wasn't performing so well. They wanted to switch to a better carrier, UPS or FedEx, and had many offers from those carriers to handle their business, but it would have required an increase in the shipping costs. So they asked me, well, what do you think? Will people actually pay more for the service they're demanding? Their customers wanted order tracking, wanted the stuff to show up on time and not get lost. And I said, well, that's an interesting question. So there'd been some really great work done early by Terry Esper as a grad student and some of the other faculty at Arkansas that looked at the fact that people do recognize some carriers are better than others. They perceive that difference. But as far as we could tell in the literature, nobody had explored whether they're willing to pay for it or not. And so I had a chance to really work with this practically motivated research question and came up with some experiments to test this and found that most people, they say they want better service, but they're not so willing to pay for it, which there was some nuance to it, but that was the gist of it. And that's the kind of insight that was, I really enjoyed having somebody share that, a practitioner say, look, we've got a problem, and, have a chance to then go do some work to help address that. I think it's one of the most rewarding things about our career.
Well, Henry and Travis, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
If you're finding value in this podcast, we greatly appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Additionally, following us on Apple and Spotify and leaving up to a 5-star review would be immensely helpful. We welcome any feedback or questions related to the podcast, as well as suggestions for further topics and guests. You can leave your comments on our YouTube channel, and rest assured that I will read each and every one of them. Please also take a moment to check out our podcast sponsors as they play a critical role in keeping this podcast running. For more information on specific topics, timestamps, or links to articles mentioned during the podcast, head over to mattwallerpodcast.com.